body was injured.
Where is he shot?
In the arm. Upper part of his arm or lower part?
Upper part or lower part? Sorry, what part of the arm is it at?
His left upper arm.
On July 29, 1999, the quiet town of Stockbridge, Georgia was rocked by a series of brutal murders. The perpetrator, a man named Mark Owen Barton, went on a killing spree that left 9 dead, including his wife and 2 children. Today, we dive into the twisted mind of a man whose legacy continues to haunt those who knew him, and an incident that went down as one of the deadliest acts of violence in Georgia history. Born on April 2, 1955, Barton was the only child of Truman and Gladys Barton, who served in the Air Force. They were stationed in Germany at the time. Barton spent much of his childhood in Europe before his family relocated to Sumter, South Carolina. Though intelligent, he was emotionally distant and often felt like an outsider amongst his peers at school. During his teenage years, Barton started abusing hallucinogenic drugs and suffered multiple accidental overdoses that resulted in several hospital visits. While attending Clemson University and later the University of South Carolina, Barton resorted to robbery to finance his drug addiction. He was eventually caught and charged with the crime and required to undergo drug and psychiatric treatment. In 1979, during his time at the University of South Carolina, where he graduated with a chemistry degree, he worked as a manual laborer. It was that same year that he encountered Deborah Spivey, a fellow student whom he had previously met while working as a night auditor at a local hotel. They tied the knot later that year. The couple had a son, Matthew, who was born on February 15th of 1988. They resided in Atlanta, where Barton got a job to analyze cleaning products before relocating to Texarkana, Texas. He eventually assumed the position of company president. You'd believe Mark lived a relatively happy life, but beneath the surface, there were signs that all was not well in the Barton household. Mark had a history of mental illness, including depression and bipolar disorder, and as a result, Barton became paranoid and controlling, and his marriage with Deborah began to experience a downturn. His erratic behavior also caused disturbances at his job, where he would secretly record his phone conversations with colleagues and manipulate orders from other salesmen to intentionally delay customer deliveries. Despite being promoted to the position of company president, his unpredictable conduct caught the attention of the board of directors. He made formula alterations without informing anybody, especially the clients. He was also storing the company's formulas on his personal computer and was subsequently terminated from this position. Following his departure, the company's offices were burglarized, resulting in the theft of confidential formulas and the deletion of computer files. Barton was subsequently arrested by the police on burglary charges, but according to a detective involved in the case, the break-in appeared to be a cover-up for kickbacks, inventory discrepancies, or even the sale of chemicals for illicit drug activities, rather than an attempt to steal the product formula. On that same day, a board member contacted the police to report that the company had come to an agreement with Barton, although no details were provided. Consequently, the charges against Barton were dropped. Barton moved to Macon, Georgia, with his wife and son, and later had their daughter Michelle on May 27th of 1991. Mark then took a job as a salesman at Lentech International, a chemical company, and that's where he got to know a young receptionist named Leanne Lang. She was married at the time, but apparently not happily. The two got pretty close, and by May of 1993, Barton and Lang were having an affair. During a dinner with Lay's friends in Charlotte, North Carolina in June of 1993, Mark professed his love for her and proposed to marry her by October 1st. He bought a new wardrobe and began keeping up a tan. This is when Deborah grew suspicious. At the same time, Barton took out a life insurance policy on Deborah. He had wanted to take out $1 million, but he couldn't afford the premiums and settled for $600,000. When asked, he said that it was her idea. He rationalized to the insurer. Deborah had enjoyed being the wife of a company president. She felt, as time went on, that she was just as important as I was, and she developed an extreme sense of self-worth. A few days later, Deborah Barton went to Alabama to spend Labor Day weekend with her mother in a lakeside trailer. Barton stayed home with their children, Michelle and Matthew, or at least that's what he told the authorities. At the end of the weekend, Deborah and Eloise's bodies were found inside the camper. They had been bludgeoned to death, and it appeared that a hatchet-like tool had been used as the murder weapon, which was never found. Deborah, who was 36 years old, had been struck in the head and face more than 13 times, while Eloise, who was 59 years old, had been struck at least 8 times. The attack seemed to have been a very personal one, as the perpetrator had unleashed a great amount of anger. A few pieces of jewelry were taken, but several $100s in cash as well as other jewelry and credit cards were left behind, leading police to believe that somebody had made a poor attempt to make the crime look like a robbery. There was also no sign of forced entry, indicating that the woman knew the murderer. When both Mark and Deborah's father, Bill, arrived at the scene, Bill was visibly shaken, and the detective noted that his face was pale. Mark, on the other hand, showed absolutely no emotion and almost seemed energetic. When Mark reached out to shake the detective's hand, he immediately said, "I've never been here before," which the detective found odd. Mark immediately became a suspect, especially after police discovered his recent purchase of a life insurance policy. They also knew about his affair with Leanne, but he had lied about it multiple times. A witness reported seeing a man who matched Mark's description asking for directions to the lake just a few hours before the murders occurred. Police determined that Mark would have had enough time to get to the lake and back home while his kids were still asleep in bed. They found a small amount of blood in his car, but it wasn't enough for DNA testing at the time. Later, investigators found evidence of blood in Mark's car and house, which he claimed was from when he had cut his finger months before, but he refused to give a blood sample for comparison. He also refused to take a polygraph test, and authorities were positive that Mark had killed his wife and mother-in-law. However, they only had circumstantial evidence, and the Alabama police weren't willing to move forward without more evidence. The Georgia authorities said that they would have moved forward if the crime had occurred in their jurisdiction. There has never been an arrest, but law enforcement officials and the woman's relatives have long considered Mark Orrin Barton the one and only suspect in the deaths of his wife and mother-in-law. Mark didn't receive immediate payoff from the Investors Life Insurance Company of Nebraska for the life insurance policy he took out on Deborah. The insurance company refused to pay him at all, believing that he was likely responsible for the crime. After years of legal battles, the insurance company eventually settled with Mark for $450,000. He received a check for $300,000, and the remaining $150,000 was placed in a trust for his 2 children. Despite reports of a tumultuous relationship, Leanne had moved in with Mark shortly after Deborah's murder, and the couple got married on May 26, 1995. They relocated to a house in Morrow, Georgia, a suburb of South Atlanta. Mark used the settlement money to quit his job in the chemical industry and pursue a career as a day trader. The stress of day trading didn't help Mark, who was already paranoid and easily agitated. Eventually, Mark's instability became too much for Leanne, and she left Mark and moved into her own apartment at the beginning of 1999. Mark had started day trading on his own at home, and sometime in 1998, he met with one of the supervisors at an all-tech investment group, Brent Doonan, to be trained on how to use their system to trade. Mark was making 10 to 15 trades a day for thousands of shares, and afterwards bumping his way up to 50 trades a day. He told everyone around him that he was a seasoned trader and gave everyone the impression that more than enough money to cover the possible losses he was risking. He didn't, though. He was risking his entire life savings. He was trying to make big money fast instead of building up his gains slowly like he had been taught. Over the next few months, Mark's account went empty, and a substantial amount of the money that he had got from Deborah's life insurance was gone. In early July, Mark had lost his house and approached Leanne at her apartment seeking for a place for himself and his children to stay. Despite having already started the divorce process, Leanne agreed to let the 3 of them stay at their apartment. On Monday, July 26th, Mark changed his will to leave everything to his children. The next day, he lost an additional $20,000 trading stocks. That night, while Leanne had been sleeping, he beat her to death with a hammer and hid her body in the closet. On Wednesday, Mark took his kids to get haircuts, out to eat, and Walmart for treats. Later that night, he killed both of his children in their bedroom with that same hammer. He then placed them face down in the bathtub. In his own words, he said, so they wouldn't wake up in pain. He washed them off and put them back into their beds with toys on top. He then wrote notes that he placed next to all 3 bodies, asking God to take care of them. In another, he wrote, I don't plan to live very much longer, just long enough to kill as many of the people that greedily sought my destruction. On Thursday, July 29, 1999, Mark called his lawyer and asked him to change his will again, this time leaving everything to his mother. At 11 a.m., Barton left his house and began a killing spree that would last for hours. His first stop was at Momentum Securities Brokerage for a supposed appointment that he had to leave $50,000 in cash there. While waiting for the manager, he calmly chatted up several other day traders, all of whom weren't aware that he was armed. When the manager still wouldn't return, Barton took out 2 pistols at around 2:45 p.m. and began a shooting rampage, effectively killing 4 and wounding several others. After 5 minutes of shooting, he then left the office and crossed the street towards the All-Tech Investment Group office, with everyone inside not being aware of the massacre that just happened several feet away from them. Entering the office and going to the manager's quarters, Barton began shooting again, hitting the manager and his secretaries before targeting clients. In total, Barton killed 9 people and wounded 13 others. Immediately after the shootings, police SWAT teams began a massive manhunt search for Barton throughout the Atlanta area. When the police reached Barton's residence, they discovered the bodies of his family and the letters that he had left for them. These shocking discoveries added to the community's distress, already reeling from the 2 office massacres. 5 hours after the rampage, Barton was seen in Kennesaw, where he had threatened a girl at a shopping mall, causing her to flee and report the incident. He fled the scene in his van, which was spotted by a pedestrian who reported it to the police. Barton was eventually followed by several police cars, and he was unaware of the fact that he was being tailed. He stopped at a gas station in Ackworth, where officers surrounded him. With no way out, Barton turned one of his guns on himself and took his own life.